The wilderness is often the place where loneliness echoes the loudest. It's a season where the familiar voices fade and the noise of the world grows silent. But in that silence, something profound happens. The absence of people doesn't mean the absence of God. In fact, it's in those moments of isolation that his presence becomes undeniable. You may feel abandoned, but you are far from forgotten. He is closer than you think, orchestrating encounters, aligning breakthroughs, and whispering words of hope into your spirit. In the stillness of the wilderness, you discover the faithfulness of a God who never leaves nor forsakes. The same God who sent manna from heaven for the Israelites and ravens to feed Elijah is the same God who watches over you. He doesn't just see where you are, he understands why you're there. And in his wisdom, he sends exactly what you need: strength for today and hope for tomorrow. Sometimes his divine messengers come in the form of encouragement from unexpected places, a kind word, a timely phone call, or a passage of scripture that leaps off the page and into your heart. These are not coincidences. They are heaven's way of reminding you that you are not walking this journey alone. Every act of provision, no matter how small, carries the fingerprints of a God who cares deeply for you. The wilderness is not a sign of rejection, it's a setup for revelation. It's where God reveals not just who he is, but who you are in him. He strips away the distractions, the doubts, and the dependencies so that you can recognize the depth of his love and the power of his presence. When you feel like you're at the end of yourself, that's often where you find the beginning of him. And that's where transformation begins. Do not mistake the silence for absence. Sometimes God whispers so you'll lean in closer. He removes the noise so his voice can resonate deeply within your soul. And when you hear it, it will shift your perspective. You'll begin to see the wilderness not as a punishment, but as a place of preparation. A place where God is shaping you, molding you, and equipping you for what's ahead. Isolation has a way of amplifying your fears, but it also amplifies God's power. When all seems lost, heaven sends reinforcements. The angels of provision, protection, and peace are dispatched to meet you right where you are. You might not see them with your natural eyes, but their presence is undeniable. They surround you in ways that defy explanation and remind you that God is your refuge and strength. Even when the road feels barren, God provides water in the desert. He sends signs of life in what appears to be dead places. Look for the divine markers along the way, the moments that remind you God is with you. They might be subtle, but they are significant. And they are his way of saying, I see you, I know you, I am with you. Isolation is where God speaks the loudest. It's where he takes you by the hand and leads you into a deeper understanding of his grace. It's in the wilderness that you realize the depth of his love isn't dependent on your circumstances, but on his unchanging character. He doesn't love you less because you're in the wilderness. He loves you enough to walk through it with you. The wilderness teaches you that you are not self-sufficient, but you are God-sufficient. When resources are scarce and strength is depleted, his grace becomes your lifeline. You discover that he is not just the God of abundance, but the God of an enough. And in his enough, you find the strength to keep going, the courage to stand, and the faith to believe. Every wilderness season has its angels. They are there to remind you that God's plans for you are good, even when the path is unclear. They bring messages of hope, strength, and encouragement that pierce through the darkness. And they come not because you've earned them, but because God's love is relentless. His care for you is unwavering. You are not forgotten in the wilderness. You are seen, you are loved, and you are carried by the one who holds the world in his hands. So when the journey feels too hard and the isolation too great, remember this: God is with you. And where God is, miracles happen, chains break, and the impossible becomes possible. Keep walking. The angels are there, and so is he. The wilderness may feel endless, but it is not where your story concludes. It is a passage, not a permanent place. When God leads you into a wilderness season, it's not to leave you there, but to prepare you for the next level of your journey. The barrenness, the silence, and the uncertainty are not indicators of failure, but signs that you are under divine construction. What feels like stagnation is actually preparation for transformation. God uses the wilderness to refine, not to define you. The wilderness doesn't label you as broken. It molds you into unshakable strength. Every hardship, every delay, every trial is working together to shape the person you're becoming. What looks like a detour is often the shortest path to the destiny God has prepared for you. Trust the process even when you don't understand it. The wilderness forces you to rely on God in ways you never imagined. It strips away the crutches, the comforts, and the distractions, leaving you with nothing but your faith. And it's in that faith, in those raw, vulnerable moments, that God builds you up. He clears the clutter to make room for his presence. The wilderness isn't a punishment, it's an opportunity to grow closer to him. Do not let the temporary nature of the wilderness trick you into permanent despair. God is teaching you endurance in this season, a resilience that will carry you into your promise. What you learn here about patience, about trust, about yourself will be the foundation for your next victory. The skills you are developing in the wilderness will be the tools you use to conquer the challenges ahead. Every season in the wilderness serves a purpose. The Israelites wandered for 40 years, not because God abandoned them, but because he was preparing them. He was building their character, teaching them reliance, and ensuring they were ready to inhabit the land he promised. Your wilderness season is doing the same. It's cultivating the strength and wisdom you'll need to steward your blessings well. Transitions are uncomfortable, but they are necessary. Before God shifts you into new territory, he refines you in the wilderness. He prepares your heart for the weight of the calling he's placed on your life. He knows that if he moves you too soon, the blessings he has in store might overwhelm you. So he slows you down, builds your endurance, and ensures you are ready for what's next. Don't rush through the wilderness. There are lessons here that you can't learn anywhere else. There's a depth to your faith that only emerges in times of struggle. There's a clarity of purpose that comes when everything else is stripped away. And there's a strength in your spirit that's being forged in the fires of this season. The wilderness may not be comfortable, but it is necessary. You may not see it now, but every step in the wilderness is bringing you closer to the promise. Even when the path seems unclear, God is directing your steps. Even when the desert feels endless, he is leading you to an oasis. He knows the way through, and if you trust him, he will bring you out stronger, wiser, and better equipped for what lies ahead. The wilderness is temporary, but what you gain in this season will last forever. The lessons, the strength, the closeness to God, they will carry you through future trials and into greater victories. Don't despise the wilderness. Embrace it as the birthplace of your breakthrough. Let God do the work he needs to do in you so that you are ready to walk into the fullness of your destiny. Remember, every wilderness has an exit. It may feel like the end, but it's actually the beginning of something extraordinary. You won't stay here forever. The same God who led you in will lead you out. The same God who provides for you here will prosper you there. Hold on, because the wilderness is not the final chapter of your story. It's the setup for a greater glory. You are in transition, not stuck. Keep moving, keep believing, keep trusting. The wilderness may be tough, but the God who walks with you is tougher. And when this season ends, you'll see that every dry place, every hard moment, and every tear was preparing you for the promise he has waiting just ahead. Sometimes we look for angels with wings expecting a supernatural display, but God often sends his help in ways we least anticipate. The answer to your prayer might not come in the form of a dramatic miracle, but through a person you never considered, a moment that seemed mundane, or even a challenge that redirects your path. God's ways are higher than ours, and his provision often comes wrapped in disguise. Your help may walk into your life as a friend with an encouraging word, a stranger offering unexpected kindness, or even a difficulty that forces you to grow. Don't overlook these moments thinking they are ordinary. What you dismiss as coincidence might be God's intervention, an angelic encounter meant to guide or strengthen you. Heaven moves through unexpected vessels to remind you that you are seen and cared for. The struggles you face can themselves be angels in disguise. That closed door, that painful detour, or that unanswered prayer might be God's way of redirecting you towards something greater. It's easy to miss the divine purpose in hardship, but often it is through the struggles that God speaks the loudest. He transforms obstacles into opportunities and setbacks into setups for something better. God has a way of using unlikely people to deliver his messages. Remember, he used a widow to sustain Elijah during a famine, a shepherd boy to take down a giant, and fishermen to carry the gospel. The people you least expect may be the very ones sent to help you in your time of need. Keep your heart open and your eyes discerning, because your angel might be standing right in front of you. Sometimes angels appear in the form of circumstances that seem to push you to your limit. When life feels overwhelming and you're forced to rely on God in a deeper way, that's when his divine presence often shines the brightest. These moments are not meant to break you, but to build you, and the help you receive during these times is proof that God hasn't forgotten you. Even struggles can carry God's fingerprints. The trials you face might be uncomfortable, but they often come with unexpected blessings. A tough season at work may teach you perseverance. A strained relationship might refine your character. These moments, though painful, are divine tools shaping you into who God created you to be. Sometimes the struggle is the angel teaching you lessons that prepare you for greater things. God can even use those who don't know him to fulfill his purpose in your life. Pharaoh's daughter found Moses and raised the deliverer of Israel. The Samaritan helped the wounded man on the road. God's angels don't always come with a spiritual title, they come with a divine assignment. Don't underestimate the power of God to work through unexpected people to fulfill his promises to you. Provision doesn't always look the way you imagined it. You may be expecting abundance and God provides just enough. You may be waiting for a clear path and God sends a companion to walk with you through the uncertainty. Be ready to recognize his hand in the little things, the daily miracles that sustain you and remind you of his faithfulness. Your angel could be a message in a song, a verse that leaps off the page, or a sermon that speaks directly to your situation. God uses countless ways to deliver his encouragement to you. The key is to stay alert and receptive, knowing that his methods are limitless. What you need may not come how you expect, but it will come exactly as you need it. God's messengers are everywhere, often hiding in plain sight. They might be the person who challenges you to be better, the situation that forces you to change, or the opportunity that stretches your faith. In whatever form they take, they are evidence that God is at work in your life, orchestrating every detail to bring about his purpose for you. When help comes in an unexpected form, don't resist it. Embrace it as part of God's divine plan. He knows what you need and when you need it, even if it doesn't align with your expectations. Trust that he is working all things together for your good, using people, situations, and even struggles as angels to guide you toward his perfect will. Desolation may feel like the end of the road, but with God, it's often the beginning of provision. When Elijah sat under the broom tree, weary and ready to give up, he discovered that even in his lowest moment, God had not forgotten him. God sent an angel with food and water, reminding him that no wilderness is too barren for divine intervention. When you feel empty, depleted, or surrounded by lack, trust that God sees your need and will supply what sustains you. In barren places, God's provision is not always about abundance, it's about sufficiency. Elijah didn't receive a banquet, but he received enough to strengthen him for the journey ahead. Often in our seasons of desolation, God doesn't overwhelm us with more than we can handle. He gives us exactly what we need to keep moving forward. He meets us in the dry places with just enough grace for today and the promise of more to come. God's provision in desolation teaches us reliance. In the wilderness, you can't depend on your own strength, resources, or plans. Everything that sustained you before is stripped away, leaving only God. And that's where miracles happen. In the absence of human solutions, God steps in to show that he alone is your source. He reminds you that his strength is made perfect in your weakness and his grace is sufficient for every need. Sometimes God's provision looks like rest. Elijah was exhausted, overwhelmed by his circumstances, and ready to quit. God didn't rebuke him for his feelings. Instead, he gave him the rest his body and soul desperately needed. In your season of desolation, don't underestimate the power of resting in God's presence. He restores, replenishes, and prepares you for what's next when you stop striving and lean into his care. The barren places reveal that God's provision often defies logic. When the Israelites wandered in the desert, God sent manna from heaven. When Hagar cried out in despair, he opened her eyes to a well of water. And when Elijah faced famine, he sent ravens to bring him food. These miracles show that God's provision doesn't rely on circumstances, it operates in the supernatural. What seems impossible to man is never impossible for God. Provision in desolation isn't always material, it's spiritual and emotional as well. In your darkest moments, God sends peace that surpasses understanding, joy that defies sorrow, and strength that carries you through. He feeds your soul when the world leaves you empty. Just as Elijah was revived on the broom tree, God renews your spirit, reminding you that he is not finished with you yet. Desolation can feel isolating, but God's provision assures you that you are never alone. When the angel touched Elijah and told him to eat, it was more than sustenance, it was a reminder of God's presence. Even in the loneliest wilderness, God is with you. He sends his angels, his word, and his spirit to comfort and sustain you. You may feel forgotten, but God has already prepared everything you need. The wilderness may look barren, but God's provision often comes hidden in plain sight. Like Hagar, sometimes you need God to open your eyes to the well that's already there. The answer to your need may already be within reach. You just need the clarity to see it. Ask God to reveal his provision and trust that he has already made a way. God's provision doesn't just sustain, it prepares. The meal Elijah received under the broom tree gave him strength for a 40-day journey to Mount Horeb. When God provides in desolation, it's not just for the moment, it's for the moment, it's for the mission. He equips you in the wilderness so you can fulfill the purpose he has for you. What you receive in this season is the foundation for what lies ahead. In desolation, God teaches you to value what truly matters. When all else is stripped away, you realize that his presence, his promises, and his provision are more than enough. The wilderness recalibrates your priorities, shifting your focus from what you lack to the abundance of God's faithfulness. It reminds you that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. The barren places are not a sign of God's absence, but of his preparation. Just as Elijah found sustenance under the broom tree, you will find that God has already planned for your needs in the wilderness. Trust him to provide not just enough to survive, but enough to thrive. Even in desolation, his provision never fails, and his promises never waver. The wilderness is not a place of punishment, it's a place of preparation. When God leads you into the wilderness, he is not abandoning you, he's developing you. It's in the wilderness that your faith is tested, your character is refined, and your focus is sharpened. God doesn't send you there to break you, but to build you into the person you need to be for the purpose he has prepared for you. In the wilderness, distractions fade and clarity emerges. The noise of the world is stripped away, leaving you face to face with God. It's in these moments of solitude that you discover what truly matters. Your vision becomes clearer and your priorities are realigned. The wilderness may feel isolating, but it's in that isolation that God reveals himself in ways you couldn't experience in the comfort of the familiar. The wilderness is where faith is forged. When the resources run out, when the path seems uncertain, and when the answers don't come quickly, that's where trust is built. God uses the dry places to teach you that he is your provider, your guide, and your source. You learn to rely on him in ways you never had to before, and that reliance becomes the foundation for everything he has called you to do. Every trial in the wilderness has a purpose. The battles you fight there are not meant to defeat you, but to develop you. God is teaching you perseverance, resilience, and dependence on his power. When David faced the lion and the bear as a shepherd, it was training for the day he would stand before Goliath. Your wilderness season is preparing you for battles that will lead to victory and breakthroughs. In the wilderness, God strips away what isn't necessary. It's a place of pruning where old habits, fears, and doubts are cut away to make room for new growth. The process may be painful, but it's necessary. God is preparing you for a weight of glory that requires strength and character. He knows what you need to leave behind to step into the fullness of your calling. Your wilderness season is not wasted. Every moment, every tear, and every struggle is being used by God to equip you. He is teaching you lessons you'll carry into the next season of your life. Just as the Israelites learned dependence on God through manna in the desert, you are learning that God's provision and guidance are enough. What you gain in the wilderness will sustain you in the promise. The wilderness is where you learn to hear God's voice. In the quiet, in the stillness, his whispers become clear. He speaks direction, comfort, and purpose into your life. What feels like a season of waiting is actually a season of divine downloads. God is preparing you for what's next by equipping you with the wisdom and revelation you'll need to walk into your destiny. The challenges you face in the wilderness are your training ground. They teach you endurance, courage, and faith. Moses spent 40 years in the desert before God called him to lead his people. Jesus spent 40 days in the wilderness before beginning his ministry. Your wilderness season is not a detour, it's a preparation for your destiny. God is working in you so he can work through you. The wilderness humbles you and reminds you of your dependence on God. It's in the lack that you learn to trust his provision, in the silence that you learn to trust his presence, and in the waiting that you learn to trust his timing. The wilderness may feel like a setback, but it's actually a setup for the next level of your life. God uses the wilderness to reveal your strength. You'll discover that you are stronger, braver, and more resilient than you thought. The trials that were meant to take you out are the very ones God uses to lift you up. The wilderness builds your confidence, not in yourself, but in the God who called you. It prepares you to walk boldly into your purpose, knowing that if He brought you through the wilderness, He'll sustain you in your promise. The wilderness is temporary, but the lessons you learn there are eternal. God is not wasting your time or your tears. He is preparing you for a purpose greater than you can imagine. Embrace the process, trust His plan, and know that when you come out of the wilderness, you'll be stronger, wiser, and ready for everything He has in store for you. When the weight of life becomes unbearable and your heart feels like it's breaking, heaven leans in to hear your cry. In those raw, vulnerable moments where words fail and you're left with nothing but tears, God is listening. Not a single sigh or silent prayer escapes His notice. He sees the depth of your pain, and before you even voice your need, He begins to send help on your behalf. God is not distant from your struggle. He is near to the brokenhearted, close to those crushed in spirit. The moments when you feel unseen are the very moments when heaven's attention is fixed on you. Angels are dispatched at the sound of your cry, carrying strength when you feel weak and peace when your world feels chaotic. You are never alone. God has set His messengers around you to guard and guide you. Even when you don't have the strength to pray, your groans become the language of heaven. The Spirit intercedes for you with sighs too deep for words, ensuring that your pain is never wasted and your cries never ignored. The tears you cry in private are counted by God, and each one carries a weight that moves heaven to action. Angels respond not because of your eloquence, but because of God's love for you. Peace is heaven's answer to the chaos of your soul. When you cry out, God doesn't just remove the storm, He sends His peace to steady you in the midst of it. That peace comes in unexpected ways, a calm that settles over your heart, a word of encouragement at just the right time, or the realization that God's presence is with you, even in the hardest moments. Peace doesn't always mean the absence of problems, it means the presence of God. Direction often follows your cry for help. In your confusion, God sends clarity. It may come through a verse that speaks to your situation, a sermon that seems tailor-made for you, or the quiet nudging of the Holy Spirit pointing you in the right direction. Heaven doesn't leave you wandering aimlessly. When you cry out, angels step in to light your path, ensuring you don't walk this journey alone or without purpose. Your vulnerability invites God's strength. When you reach the end of yourself, you find the beginning of His power. Angels ministered to Jesus in the wilderness, strengthening Him after 40 days of fasting and temptation. The same God who sent help to His Son sends help to you. He knows exactly what you need, and in your weakest moments, He provides it. You don't have to be strong on your own. Heaven fights for you. Heaven hears not only the cry of desperation, but also the cry of surrender. When you release control and say, God, I can't do this on my own, you make room for divine intervention. The angels that stood ready now move into action. They surround you, protect you, and carry the answers to prayers you didn't even know how to pray. Your surrender is the trigger for heaven's response. When Hagar cried out in the wilderness, God heard her and sent an angel to show her a well of water she hadn't seen before. When Peter was imprisoned, the church prayed and an angel came to set him free. Heaven's response to your cry is not a thing of the past, it's a present reality. God hears you just as clearly today as He did then, and He moves just as powerfully. Your cry doesn't have to be loud to be heard. Elijah's cry for death under the broom tree was met with an angel's gentle touch and provision. God's response isn't determined by the volume of your cry, but by the sincerity of your heart. Even a whisper is enough to move heaven when it comes from a place of faith and trust in Him. Angels act not because of your merit, but because of God's mercy. You don't have to earn heaven's attention. It is already fixed on you because of His unfailing love. When you cry out, it's not a question of if God will respond, it's a matter of how. His timing and methods may not match your expectations, but His faithfulness never fails. Heaven's response to your cry reminds you that you are deeply loved. God doesn't just hear from a distance, He draws near. He sends His angels to minister to you, His Spirit to comfort you, and His word to guide you. When words fail and tears fall, rest assured that heaven is listening, angels are moving, and God is working on your behalf. Your cry reaches the heart of the Father, and his answer is always on the way. The wilderness is not just a place of struggle, it is the birthplace of breakthrough. In the barren, difficult moments, God is preparing something new. Every wilderness season holds within it the seed of new beginnings. It may feel like you're stuck, surrounded by dryness and difficulty, but God is doing a work within you that will bring forth something new, something better, and something far beyond what you can imagine. Breakthrough doesn't come without pressure. Just as a seed must be buried in the soil and go through a period of darkness before it sprouts, so too must your faith be tested in the wilderness before it can be strengthened. The wilderness may feel like a place of isolation, but it's actually where God cultivates the conditions for your growth. It's in the struggle that God refines you, purges the old, and prepares you to receive his promises. Every moment of difficulty in the wilderness is shaping you for the breakthrough that is to come. When the Israelites were in the desert, they didn't realize it, but each step they took was leading them closer to the promised land. Every challenge they faced, every obstacle they overcame was a step closer to the land flowing with milk and honey. The same is true for you. Every trial, every test is shaping you for the land God has promised you. The wilderness is where God does his deepest work. It's not in the comfort of ease that we grow the most. It's in the discomfort, the stretching, and the refining. There in the desert, God teaches you to rely fully on him, to trust in his provision, and to hold on to his promises even when everything around you seems to be saying otherwise. That is where your faith is forged, and that faith will be the foundation for the breakthrough ahead. In the wilderness, God is building your endurance. The trials you face in this season are developing your perseverance and teaching you how to stand firm. Every time you press through the struggle, you are being prepared for the breakthrough. Just as an athlete strengthens their muscles through resistance, so too does God strengthen your spirit through the challenges of the wilderness. Endurance is not just about surviving, it's about thriving through every season, knowing that God's plan for you is greater than the moment you're in. Breakthrough in the wilderness also requires a shift in perspective. The wilderness may look like desolation, but it is also a place where God reveals his faithfulness. When you feel like there's nothing left, when the road seems long and the journey uncertain, that is the moment when God often moves the most powerfully. He shows you that even in the wilderness, he is still with you, still providing, still guiding. Your breakthrough is often birthed when you choose to see beyond your current circumstances and trust God for what's ahead. The wilderness season may feel like waiting, but it's actually the perfect time for God to prepare you for what you are about to receive. It is in the wilderness that he equips you with everything you need to walk into the promise. The lessons you learn in the wilderness, the character you build, and the faith you develop will be what sustains you once you enter the land of abundance. The breakthrough is not just the destination, it is the transformation that happens within you as you trust God to lead you. It's important to remember that breakthrough is often birthed in the wilderness because the wilderness prepares you to steward the blessings that will come. If God were to give you the promise too soon, you wouldn't have the strength, wisdom, or character to handle it. Just as a mother carries her child through the birthing process, God is carrying you through your wilderness, preparing you to give birth to something new, something that will be worth the wait. In the wilderness, God may not always give you the full picture, but he gives you just enough to keep moving forward. You may not see the end of the journey, but God is leading you step by step toward the breakthrough. Every moment of obedience, every act of faith is bringing you closer to the place where his promises will be fulfilled. Trust him even when you can't see the outcome, knowing that he is faithful to lead you into a land flowing with promise. Don't despise the wilderness. It's the training ground for your breakthrough. It is the place where God refines you, strengthens you, and prepares you to handle the fullness of his promises. Trust that this season is temporary, and as you press on, you will begin to see the fruit of your faithfulness. Just as the Israelites walked out of the wilderness into the promised land, you too will step into the blessings that God has prepared for you. Breakthrough is not just about what God is doing for you, it's about what he's doing in you. The wilderness is the proving ground for the greatness that lies ahead. So trust the process, hold on to God's promises, and know that your breakthrough is being birthed even now, in the midst of the wilderness. In the midst of your wilderness, there is a profound power in stillness. When everything around you is in turmoil and the world is rushing by, it can feel like the only way to make progress is by pushing harder, doing more, and striving to break through. But God's ways are often different. He invites you to pause, to be still, and to trust that he is at work even when you can't see it. In stillness, God is orchestrating your deliverance in ways that your striving could never achieve. Stillness doesn't mean inactivity, it means surrendering control and resting in God's sovereignty. When you are still, you allow God to move in ways that you cannot. Angels, messengers sent from heaven, whisper into your spirit during these quiet moments, reminding you that your deliverance is already in motion. They encourage you to trust in the process and to stop fighting against the very work that God is doing in your life. The world tells you to keep pushing forward, but heaven says, be still and know that I am God. The wilderness season is designed to teach you the power of surrender. In your struggle, you might feel that you need to fix everything or control the outcome. But in the quiet, God does his most powerful work. The stillness becomes a sanctuary where he refines you, renews you, and prepares you for what's next. It's in the silence that you can hear the still, small voice of God guiding you. While you may be waiting on deliverance, God is working behind the scenes, and in stillness, you gain the perspective to see that his timing is always perfect. Angels speak peace into your heart in these moments of stillness, offering a calm assurance that you are not alone. It may feel as though nothing is happening, but the truth is that God is moving in ways you cannot yet comprehend. He is aligning the pieces, opening doors, and preparing you for what lies ahead. As you choose to trust and be still, you create the space for divine intervention and timing to unfold in its fullest form. Stillness allows you to shift your focus from the noise of your circumstances to the promises of God. The wilderness might be filled with confusion, fear, and uncertainty, but stillness clears away the clutter of worry and doubt. It is in those quiet moments that you remember that the God who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light is also the God who walks with you through the wilderness. He is your shepherd, and you shall not want. In stillness, you find that he is faithful to lead you to still waters, even in the desert. The angels of the Lord stand by, waiting for you to embrace stillness, because in that surrender, they are able to assist you more powerfully. As you rest in God's presence, his angels are dispatched to guard you, comfort you, and guide you toward your breakthrough. Just as Jesus, in his moment of greatest distress, withdrew to pray and find strength, you too will find strength in stillness. When you stop fighting and start trusting, you allow God's power to flow more freely in your life. In the wilderness, there is a grace that comes with stillness. It's the grace to let go of your need for control and to accept the peace that God offers. In the busyness of life, we often forget that our best work is done from a place of rest, not hustle. But in the wilderness, God teaches you that stillness is not weakness, it is the foundation of true strength. When you are still, you allow God to fight on your behalf, to handle what you cannot, and to bring deliverance in ways you never imagined. Angels encourage you to embrace the power of stillness, because it is in that moment that you can see the hand of God at work. While you wait, while you pause, God is setting things in motion. He is setting things right. Trust in his timing, and don't be afraid to rest in his presence. In stillness, your faith is strengthened, your heart is aligned with his, and you prepare yourself to receive what he is about to do in your life. The wilderness is a place where the noise of life is silenced, and stillness is your weapon. When you learn to be still, you open the door for God to reveal himself to you in ways that active striving could never accomplish. The wilderness is a season of preparation, and it is in stillness that you are made ready for the promises that lie ahead. Just as Jesus withdrew to pray in the wilderness, you too are called to be still, trust, and wait for the deliverance that God is orchestrating right now. In the quiet, the angels of heaven are not only surrounding you, but strengthening your spirit. They help you align with God's will, keeping you focused on the promise ahead. Be still and let God move in ways that will lead you from the wilderness to the land of his promise, a land flowing with the fulfillment of everything he has spoken over your life. The wilderness is a place where distractions are stripped away, and in that space of quiet, your spiritual sight begins to sharpen. When everything around you is calm and the noise of the world fades, you can begin to see the invisible hand of God at work in your life. The wilderness, though uncomfortable, clears the clutter from your mind and heart, enabling you to perceive God's presence in ways you might have missed in times of ease. In this sacred space, God reveals himself more clearly, his direction, his provision, and his faithfulness. In the wilderness, God is often working behind the scenes, orchestrating divine interventions that you can't yet see. But as you surrender and focus on him, your spiritual vision becomes clearer. You begin to see how he has been leading you all along, how he has been providing even in the most difficult times, and how his hand has been guiding your steps, even when you felt alone. The wilderness may seem like a place of barrenness, but in truth, it's a place where God's activity is most apparent to those who are willing to see. The trials and challenges of the wilderness refine your vision. They remove the distractions and the comforts that might have kept your focus elsewhere. When you're in a barren place, you are forced to look at things from a different perspective. Your reliance on God grows and your awareness of his presence becomes more acute. Every moment becomes an opportunity to see his faithfulness in action, whether it's through the provision of a small blessing or the subtle ways he speaks into your heart. God uses the wilderness to open your eyes to the bigger picture. It's often easy to become consumed with the present difficulty, but in the wilderness, God lifts your vision beyond the immediate struggles to see the promise he has for you. Your temporary pain becomes a reminder of the future joy. Your present struggles are seen in the light of future victory, and the wilderness is not the end, it's the pathway to the promise. Through the wilderness, you begin to see God's plan for your life more clearly. Sometimes God allows the wilderness to clear your sight of the things that were clouding your judgment, fear, doubt, pride, or confusion. In this barren place, you're stripped down to the essentials, and with that comes the clarity to see what God is truly doing in your life. You may not have asked for the wilderness, but it is in that very place that God unveils his divine interventions, allowing you to see how he is aligning your life with his will. The wilderness can be a time of divine revelation. As you grow still and wait upon God, your spiritual sight is open to see things you couldn't before. You begin to recognize how God has been working in your life, how he has been protecting you, how he has been guiding you, and how he has been shaping your character for the season that lies ahead. What once seemed like obstacles become stepping stones, and what felt like abandonment becomes an invitation to deeper intimacy with God. In the wilderness, you begin to see the provision of God in ways you might not have noticed before. Just as the Israelites had manna provided for them each day, God provides for you in subtle yet miraculous ways. When you're forced to rely solely on him, you realize that the true provision comes not from the resources around you, but from the hand of God. Your spiritual eyes are open to see the divine supply that has been with you all along. The wilderness also heightens your ability to see the opportunities for growth. Every difficulty you face is not just a challenge, it's a chance for spiritual growth. The wilderness teaches you resilience, patience, and dependence on God. It sharpens your understanding of his ways and gives you the clarity to see how each experience is preparing you for the next chapter. You begin to understand that the wilderness is not a detour, but an integral part of the journey that leads to the promise. God uses the wilderness to align your heart with his. When your surroundings are stripped away, you become more attuned to his voice. The distractions that once competed for your attention fade, and God's whispers become clearer. Your ability to discern his will grows, and your heart becomes more aligned with his purposes. In the wilderness, your spiritual sight is refined so that when the promise comes, you can see it clearly and know it is God's will. In the wilderness, your relationship with God deepens and your spiritual sight is sharpened. The trials and struggles you face force you to depend on him in ways that deepen your trust. You begin to see not just what God is doing for you in the moment, but also how he is preparing you for greater things ahead. You may not see the full picture yet, but as you continue to trust him, your vision of his hand in your life will become clearer, and you will begin to understand that this wilderness is part of his divine plan. The wilderness teaches you to see God's faithfulness in the small things. When the large blessings seem absent, you learn to recognize the subtle, often quiet ways that God is intervening in your life. It's in the wilderness that you learn to appreciate the little miracles, the moments of peace, the unexpected help, the provision that comes just when you need it. Your spiritual sight is heightened, and you begin to see that God is present in every detail, even in the wilderness. In the midst of desolation, when everything around you seems to be falling apart, worship becomes your weapon. It's easy to focus on the problems, the pain, and the pressure, but worship shifts your focus from the circumstances to the greatness of your God. It reminds you that no matter how dire your situation may seem, God is still worthy of praise, and in that praise there is power. When you worship, you invite the very presence of God to come near. And where his presence is, angels are dispatched to fight the battles you cannot see. Worship is more than just a song. It's a declaration of faith. It's an act of surrender in the face of adversity, choosing to acknowledge God's sovereignty even when everything else is uncertain. When you worship, you are aligning yourself with the heart of God and inviting His divine intervention into your situation. Angels are sent to minister on your behalf, fighting unseen battles in the spiritual realm, clearing the path for God's will to be done in your life. Your worship creates an atmosphere where heaven's power is activated. In the wilderness, worship becomes your declaration of trust in God's goodness. When you choose to worship in the midst of your desolation, you are telling the enemy that you will not be moved by your circumstances. You are telling heaven that you believe God is still in control, that you believe He will provide, and that you believe He is working on your behalf, even when you can't see it. Worship is a powerful declaration that God is greater than any problem, any situation, or any fear that tries to rise up against you. The power of worship goes beyond what we can understand. Just as Paul and Silas, when locked in prison, chose to sing praises to God, the prison doors were open and the chains were broken. Worship has the power to unlock what seems impossible and to break chains that hold you captive. When you worship, you are releasing the power of heaven into your circumstances. It may not always look like an instant miracle, but worship sets in motion the movement of angels and the hand of God in your situation. When you are in the midst of desolation, worshiping God invites His angels to fight for you in ways you cannot see or comprehend. You may not always be aware of the spiritual battles taking place, but know that your worship is a weapon that causes angels to move on your behalf. These divine warriors fight the unseen forces that seek to oppose God's will in your life. Your worship doesn't just bring you peace, it activates angelic intervention, ensuring that your breakthrough is on the way. Angels are ministers of God's will, and when you worship, you align yourself with heaven's purposes. Your worship is like a summons to the spiritual realm, a call for angels to step in and assist you. Just as the Bible tells us that angels are sent to protect, provide for, and fight on behalf of God's people, your worship becomes the signal that releases their power into your life. Worship doesn't just change the atmosphere around you, it activates the forces of heaven to move on your behalf. Worship in desolation refines your spirit and strengthens your faith. It's easy to worship when everything is going well, but the true power of worship emerges when you praise in the midst of struggle. Your worship in the wilderness becomes an act of resistance, standing against the enemy's attempts to steal your joy, your peace, and your faith. When you praise God despite your pain, you are sowing seeds of victory, knowing that your worship is never wasted. It has the power to move mountains and change the course of your life. In desolation, worship clears the air. When your heart is heavy and your mind is cluttered with worry, worship cuts through the fog of confusion and doubt. It lifts your eyes from the circumstances to the eternal truth of God's power, sovereignty, and love. As you worship, you create space for the angels to move freely on your behalf, bringing clarity and direction to your soul. Worship silences the noise of fear and invites the sound of heaven to invade your life, bringing peace that surpasses understanding. Worship is your declaration that God is bigger than your wilderness. The desolation you face may be real, but it is not the end of your story. Through worship, you are reminding yourself and the spiritual realm that God is still God, that He is still good, and that He is still on your side. Even when the odds are stacked against you, worship keeps your eyes focused on the one who can turn your situation around. Your worship becomes an act of faith, trusting that God will bring you through to the other side. When you worship in the wilderness, it's like setting a spiritual alarm, calling forth angelic assistance. Angels respond to the praises of God's people, and they go to work on your behalf when you choose to praise. In moments when you feel powerless, worship becomes your battle cry. As you magnify God in the middle of your storm, angels move, chains are broken, and doors that seemed locked suddenly swing wide open. Worship isn't just an expression of faith, it's the key that unlocks heaven's resources for you. Your worship in desolation serves as a witness to the world and to the enemy. When you praise in the midst of hardship, it declares that God is faithful no matter the circumstances. Your worship brings the presence of angels, but it also brings glory to God. It's a testimony that says, even here I will praise Him, even now I trust Him. Worship becomes a weapon that not only fights battles, but also builds the kingdom of God in your life and in the world around you. In the wilderness, when the weight of life feels unbearable and the challenge seems insurmountable, God sends His angels not to remove the struggle, but to strengthen you in the midst of it. The angels are not sent to take the battle out of your hands. They are sent to empower you to rise above it. When you feel like you can't go another step, God's messengers come alongside you, providing the strength and encouragement you need to keep moving forward. They are not here to replace you in the fight, but to help you walk in victory, knowing that God has equipped you with everything you need to overcome. Angels are not a substitute for your responsibility. They are the divine helpers who assist you in carrying out God's will in your life. When you feel weak, they come to strengthen your resolve. They remind you that God's presence is with you, that you are not alone, and that the challenge you are facing is not greater than the God who is with you. Angels don't fight your battles for you. They empower you to stand firm in your faith and to trust that God will provide the strength you need to prevail. When Jesus faced his moment of greatest struggle in the Garden of Gethsemane, he didn't ask the angels to take away the cross. He asked God for the strength to endure it, and the angels came to strengthen him. They didn't remove the challenge, they equipped him to face it. Similarly, in your life, God does not promise to remove every hardship, but he promises to send help in the form of angels who will fortify you and give you the courage to continue pressing forward. Angels are not here to take the struggle away. They are here to ensure that you are never facing it alone. They help you see things from God's perspective, reminding you that your victory is already secured in Christ. When you are weary, they encourage you to rise up with new strength. Just as Elijah was strengthened by an angel under the broom tree, you too will find the courage to get back up when you feel exhausted. Your fight is not over, and angels are there to lift you, give you fresh perspective, and help you continue the journey. The strength that angels provide is not about removing obstacles, but about preparing you to overcome them. The wilderness can make you feel small, insignificant, and overwhelmed, but God uses the angels to remind you the power to conquer the wilderness resides within you. They come to affirm that you are more than a conqueror through Christ who strengthens you. The battles may be fierce, but your victory is certain as you lean on God's strength with the assistance of his angelic army. Angels are messengers of encouragement, sent to speak truth into your heart when the lies of the enemy threaten to overwhelm you. In your weakness, they declare God's promises over your life. They remind you that the battle is not yours alone, that God has equipped you to endure, and that through every challenge, he is making you stronger. Their presence is a reminder that you are not fighting on your own, that God has sent reinforcements to help you rise above the struggle. It's important to understand that the challenge itself is not always something to be removed. God uses challenges to shape us, to refine us, and to prepare us for greater things. Angels don't come to take away the process, they come to strengthen you in it. They are part of the divine plan to equip you to endure, to build your character, and to lead you into the fullness of your destiny. The strength they provide is not just physical, it is emotional, mental, and spiritual. They help you tap into the strength that comes from God alone. When you feel like you can't handle another moment of struggle, remember that God is sending angels to empower you, not to take the fight out of your hands. They remind you that you are stronger than you think, that God is with you, and that his grace is sufficient for you. You may feel overwhelmed, but the angels are there to encourage you to keep going, to rise above the challenge, and to walk in victory. Angels provide strength in ways that you might not even realize. They don't always show up in visible forms, but they work in your heart, stirring your spirit and strengthening your faith. You might find the courage to continue the journey in the quiet moments of prayer or in the sudden surge of hope that rises within you. These are the results of angelic influence guiding you toward your victory. They don't remove the battle, they help you see that you are prepared for it, that you have everything you need in Christ to overcome. The role of angels is not to replace you in the battle, but to support you as you rise to meet it. They help you bear the weight of the challenge and keep your focus on the ultimate victory that lies ahead. You are not meant to run away from the wilderness or the storm. You are meant to walk through it with the strength that God provides. With angels by your side, you are empowered to rise above the struggle, to stand firm in your faith, and to walk in the victory that God has already secured for you. Thanks for watching.